The redwood forest of Northern California is a place of profound tranquility, where towering trees seem to touch the heavens, and the forest floor is rich with the scent of moss and damp earth. I often found solace here, the natural beauty of the place offering a welcome escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. It was during one of these moments of peace, when I was walking alone, that the unexpected happened, a moment that would stay with me for the rest of my life. My name is Dr. James Harper, and I am a wildlife veterinarian. I had been working in the redwood forest for several years, helping to protect and care for the animals that inhabit this vast, green expanse. On this particular day, I was deep in thought, wandering through the dense undergrowth, appreciating the quiet solitude the forest offered. My mind, at peace, roamed over memories of the many creatures I had cared for throughout my career. It had been a long time since I had experienced such a quiet moment, and I felt fortunate to be in this place. But suddenly, the calm was shattered. A loud trumpet, unmistakably the sound of an elephant, rang out through the trees. I froze, momentarily disoriented. The sharp, resonant sound pierced the air, echoing through the canopy above me. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, fear gripped me. Elephants, though majestic and gentle, are still massive and powerful creatures. My mind raced with thoughts of whether I had wandered too close to the herd. But then, as I stood there, the brief moment of fear passed, replaced by a deep sense of curiosity. I couldn't help myself. There was something about that trumpet, something familiar in the sound that tugged at my memory. I couldn't ignore it. Slowly, I started to move toward the source of the sound, trying to be as quiet and unobtrusive as possible. With each step, the ground beneath me vibrated from the heavy footsteps of the elephants. The air seemed to hum with their presence, each movement reverberating through the trees. The further I ventured, the stronger the feeling grew. There was something about this moment that seemed so familiar, though I couldn't place it. As I reached a higher vantage point, I looked down into a small clearing, where I saw a herd of elephants feeding. Their enormous bodies loomed over the landscape, gracefully plucking leaves and fruits from the tall trees that surrounded them. These elephants, though once scarred by the horrors of poaching, seemed to have found a sense of peace in their natural habitat. I stood there for a while, watching them with awe, reflecting on the resilience of these magnificent creatures. Many of them had faced unimaginable challenges, and yet here they were, thriving in the wild once again. But then, I shifted my position, hoping to crouch down for a better view. In my eagerness, I lost my balance and tumbled down a small cliff. The sudden noise echoed through the still forest, and immediately, the three closest elephants turned their heads in my direction. A wave of panic surged through me. The elephants' large, intelligent eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I was sure I had made a terrible mistake. I froze, hoping they hadn't seen me as a threat. The tension in the air was thick, and I could feel my heart racing. Time seemed to stretch as we all stood there, locked in a silent standoff. I held my breath, trying not to make any sudden movements. The elephants, though curious, did not charge or make any aggressive gestures. Instead, they studied me with their deep, intelligent gazes. One elephant, larger than the rest, took a few steps toward me, and I winced, bracing myself for what might come next. But then, something extraordinary happened. The elephant's behavior shifted. What had begun as a stance of aggression slowly turned into one of curiosity. The animal, still cautious, moved closer, but in a way that was not threatening. It was at that moment that I realized something. The trumpet that had drawn me here, the one that seemed so familiar, wasn't just any trumpet. I had heard that sound before. I had heard it 12 years ago, when I first met this elephant. My heart skipped a beat as the realization hit me. This wasn't just any elephant. It was Rocky, the same elephant I had saved all those years ago. The memory came flooding back in an instant. I remembered the young, ailing elephant lying by the side of the road. Weak and frail, I had rushed to his side, desperate to save him. That was the moment our bond had been formed. Now, here he was, standing before me in the same forest, but fully grown, strong, and healthy. And he recognized me. After all these years, Rocky remembered the veterinarian who had saved his life. As I stood there, emotions overwhelming me, I slowly extended my hand toward him. There was fear in my heart, fear of the unknown, fear of the immense size of the animal before me, but there was also a deep sense of recognition and affection. I had saved his life, and he had never forgotten. The bond we shared, formed through compassion and care, had stood the test of time. Rocky's response was nothing short of miraculous. Without hesitation, he extended his trunk toward me, gently touching my outstretched hand. The moment our hands made contact, an overwhelming wave of emotion surged through me. It was as if time had collapsed in on itself, and I was transported back to that moment when I had first met this remarkable creature. The years between us seemed to vanish in an instant, and I was once again the young veterinarian, desperately trying to save a life. The connection we shared was profound, transcending the years and circumstances that had separated us. In that simple touch, more words were exchanged than any conversation could ever convey. It was a silent exchange of gratitude, of love, and of the unspoken bond that had endured all these years. Rocky trumpeted again, this time louder, as if calling to the other elephants. And for a moment, the world stood still. The forest, the trees, the earth beneath our feet all seemed to pause in awe of this extraordinary reunion. The bond between man and animal, forged through compassion and kindness, had stood the test of time. And now, here we were, reunited once again in the heart of the redwood forest. It was a moment I would never forget. A moment that would change my life forever. The next few days after that incredible reunion were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the profound connection I had shared with Rocky. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the deep, soulful sound of his trumpet echoing in my ears. The way he had recognized me, despite the many years that had passed, was something that lingered in my heart and mind. It was a reminder that, no matter how much time passes, some bonds can never be broken. I returned to my work in the redwood forest. But my thoughts were never far from that moment. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the miracle of seeing Rocky alive and thriving, but for the realization of how far we had both come. I had helped save his life all those years ago, and now he had returned the favor by teaching me something I hadn't realized I needed to learn: trust. In my line of work, trust is something I've always had to give, especially when it comes to the animals I care for. I spent my days treating injuries, performing checkups, and administering care to creatures who were often terrified of humans. Trust was something I tried to build with each patient, but I hadn't realized how much I had lost sight of it in my own life until that moment with Rocky. Over the years, I had become more guarded. The painful losses, the challenges of my career, and the never-ending demands of my job had slowly worn me down. I had distanced myself from others, afraid of the vulnerability that trust requires. And yet, here was Rocky, a massive, powerful creature who had every reason to distrust humans, offering me a second chance at connection. His gesture was simple, touching my hand with his trunk, but it was more profound than any words could express. I spent the next few days returning to the clearing where I had found Rocky, hoping to see him again. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than a mere reunion. Each day, I would walk through the forest, hoping that Rocky would appear, but I didn't want to rush things. The bond we shared was already so special, so sacred, that I wasn't ready to interfere with it. I wanted to let the relationship grow at its own pace. On the fourth day, as I walked into the clearing, I saw him again. He was there, just as he had been before, This time, however, the herd was with him. The other elephants, large and small, moved gracefully through the clearing, eating and drinking. Rocky was standing nearby, watching me intently, his eyes full of recognition. I stood there for a moment, taking in the sight. There was a sense of peace in the way the elephants moved, an unspoken harmony between them. I slowly approached the group, not wanting to startle them. Rocky, noticing my presence, moved towards me, his massive form effortlessly gliding through the grass. As he reached me, I extended my hand again, this time with less hesitation. This time, he didn't hesitate either. His trunk curled around my hand, and in that moment, I knew that we were both ready to take the next step in our journey together. But this time, something was different. As I stood there with Rocky, I felt a deep sense of connection, not just to him, but to the entire herd. There was something about the way they moved together, how each elephant seemed to rely on the others, that resonated deeply within me. The bond they shared was not just between one individual and another, it was a collective bond. It was a trust in the entire community, and it was something I had been missing in my own life. I watched as Rocky interacted with the others, nuzzling a smaller elephant with his trunk, guiding one of the younger ones towards a patch of fruit. It was clear that the bond between them was one of mutual respect and love. I realized that, as much as Rocky had taught me about trust, the herd had shown me something else, the importance of community. For the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of something that had long been absent from my life, a sense of belonging. The forest, once a place of solitude, now felt like a shared space. The elephants, though wild and free, had a bond that transcended their individual needs. They understood something that I had forgotten, that life is richer when shared, when trust is extended not just to one, but to all. As I stood there, I knew that my time in the redwood forest had changed forever. What had started as a solitary mission to protect the animals had now become something much deeper. I was no longer just a caretaker of animals. I was part of something greater, a community of beings that shared this beautiful, wild world. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself that I would carry the lessons of trust, connection, and community with me, wherever life might take me. The road ahead would not be easy. There would still be challenges, still be moments when trust would be tested. But I knew that, just as Rocky had given me a chance at redemption, I too had a chance to rebuild the trust one had lost. With each passing day, I would work to deepen that bond, not just with the elephants, but with those around me. Trust, I had learned, was not something that could be given and forgotten. It was something that had to be nurtured, rebuilt, and cherished. And so, I left the clearing that day, with a sense of peace in my heart, knowing that the journey with Rocky, and the lessons he had taught me, had only just begun. As the days continued to pass, I found myself becoming more entwined with the lives of the elephants. Every morning, I would return to the clearing, hoping to see Rocky and the herd. The connection between us had deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about the physical act of care, it was about understanding the rhythms of their lives, the way they communicated, and the silent, unspoken trust they had extended to me. It was a gift I didn't take lightly. Rocky became more than just a symbol of the past for me. He was a teacher, a living testament to resilience, and a reminder of the profound beauty that comes with overcoming hardship. He had survived the cruelty of poachers, had made it through the tumult of the wild, and yet he carried none of that trauma in his eyes. When I looked at him, I saw strength, but I also saw something else, a wisdom, a gentleness that had been honed over years of hardship. In our time together, I learned that elephants are not just creatures of survival. They are guardians of memories, of history. The way they moved through the forest, their deep, slow movements, spoke of ancient knowledge. Each step they took seemed to carry the weight of generations. and I began to wonder about the stories they could tell if they were only given a voice. I spent hours just sitting with the herd, watching them interact, communicating in ways I could never fully understand but could feel deeply in my bones. It wasn't just the trumpet calls or the rumbles that passed through the ground, it was the way their bodies shifted. The subtle language of touch, of shared looks. I began to realize that these elephants, despite being wild, had a quiet and profound empathy for one another. Their bonds were not based on survival alone, but on something deeper. It was a connection built on love, trust, and mutual respect. One afternoon, I arrived to find Rocky alone near the edge of the clearing, his massive frame silhouetted against the setting sun. There was something different about him that day, something more contemplative in his posture. I approached slowly, not wanting to disturb his peace. He turned his head slightly as I neared, his eyes soft yet full of recognition. He didn't move away. Instead, he extended his trunk towards me, a gentle invitation to come closer. I stepped forward, placing my hand in the warm curve of his trunk. It was then that I noticed the deep scar along his side, a reminder of the wounds he had suffered in his earlier years. It was not a physical wound I could heal, but it was one I could acknowledge. And in that moment, I understood something. Rocky was not just extending his trust to me in the present, he was offering me a window into his past. One that was not free of pain, but full of the healing that comes when we allow ourselves to move forward. For a long while, we stood there in silence. The wind rustled the trees, and the forest hummed with life around us. It was as though time had slowed down, as though the world had disappeared, leaving just the two of us in our shared space. I didn't know what Rocky was thinking, but I knew that we were connected in a way that defied explanation. We both had our histories, our burdens, but we also had the present, and the ability to choose how to move forward. After a while, Rocky turned and began to slowly move back toward the herd. I followed, my heart full of gratitude. I knew that this was not the end of our journey together, but rather, the beginning of something even more profound. There were still challenges ahead, both for me and for Rocky. The world outside the forest was not always kind, and the shadow of the past would always linger. But I had come to understand that healing, both for him and for myself, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live with it, to accept it, and to move forward together, in the present, with trust. As I watched the herd gather once more, Rocky standing at the forefront, I knew that I had found something rare, something irreplaceable. It wasn't just the bond between a human and an elephant, but a shared understanding of what it means to heal, to trust, and to embrace life with all its beauty and pain. It was a lesson I would carry with me forever. I walked back toward the edge of the clearing, my steps light with a newfound sense of purpose. The connection I had with Rocky and the herd was more than just a fleeting moment. It was a deep and lasting bond that had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. And in the silence of the forest, I knew that I was not just a visitor anymore. I was part of something greater. The days grew longer, and the seasons began to change. The air carried a slight chill in the mornings, and the trees whispered with the soft rustling of leaves turning color. My connection to the elephants, especially to Rocky, had deepened in ways I couldn't have imagined when I first set foot in that clearing. There were moments of wonder, of quiet joy, but there were also moments of doubt and uncertainty. I had learned much about the elephants, but there was still much I didn't understand. The challenge now was trust, not just between Rocky and myself, but trust within the herd and in the broader world that was always pressing on us. One morning, as I approached the clearing, I noticed something strange. The herd was scattered, their usual calm disrupted by a tension in the air. Rocky was pacing at the center, his large ears flapping, his trunk raised in a low rumble. I approached cautiously, unsure of what was happening. The elephants were not usually this unsettled. They had lived for so long without human interference. but something had caused them to become restless. As I moved closer, I spotted the source of their anxiety. A group of strangers, local hunters, had appeared at the edge of the forest. They were men I had seen before, passing through the village, but I had never spoken to them. The herd must have sensed their presence long before I had, and their reactions spoke volumes. Rocky stood firm, but the rest of the elephants were nervous. Their ears flicking, their bodies tense. They were on edge. I felt a deep surge of anger and fear. My first instinct was to rush forward and confront the hunters, to protect the elephants, to ensure they weren't threatened. But I knew I had to remain calm. The herd was looking to me, to the way I would react. I had to show them that I wasn't afraid, that I wouldn't bring harm to them, but would stand firm in their defense. I took a deep breath and slowly walked toward Rocky. I placed my hand gently on his massive side, feeling the warmth of his skin through the thin fabric of my shirt. I could feel the tension in him, in his every muscle. He was a creature of incredible strength, but even he could be affected by the fear of the unknown. I looked into his eyes, trying to offer him something more than just reassurance. I was offering him my trust, my commitment to stand with him. The hunters had not yet noticed me. Their attention focused on the herd. I was aware that I had to act quickly, to send a signal that would stop them from moving any closer. Without taking my hand off Rocky, I stepped back slightly, raising my voice to a firm but calm level. "Stay back," I called out, trying to project confidence even as my heart raced. "These animals are protected." The hunters paused, looking at me, sizing me up. They were men hardened by years of living in the wild, and I knew they had little respect for outsiders like me. But in that moment, I wasn't an outsider. I was part of this land, part of this family. The connection I had with the elephants wasn't something they could easily dismiss. The herd was listening, waiting for my next move. Rocky took a slow, deliberate step forward, his large body blocking the path of the hunters. His movements were calculated, unhurried. The rest of the herd began to shift with him, their presence forming an unspoken barrier between the hunters and the safety of the forest. It was a silent demonstration of trust in me, but also a declaration of their own autonomy. They didn't need to flee. Not if they had each other. Not if they had me. The tension in the air was palpable. And for a long moment, no one moved. Then, one of the hunters raised his hands in the air, signaling that they would not press forward. "We'll go," he said with a mixture of disdain and acknowledgement. Slowly, they turned and disappeared into the forest, their retreat just as quiet and deliberate as their approach. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my body sagging with the release of tension. Rocky stood still for a moment longer, as if waiting for confirmation that the danger had truly passed. Then, with a soft rumble from his chest, he stepped back, joining the rest of the herd. The air seemed to calm around us, the uneasy stillness giving way to a sense of relief. I looked at Rocky, feeling the weight of the moment settle between us. There had been a test of trust not just between us, but between the herd and the world outside. It wasn't just about protecting the elephants physically, it was about understanding that trust could take many forms. It wasn't just given, it had to be earned. And it had to be tested. In that moment, I had learned just how much the elephants had already given me. They were not just survivors. They were guardians. Not only of their own world, but of mine. The days after the encounter with the hunters were quieter, but a change had settled over the herd. Rocky and the other elephants had become more watchful, as if they had learned to rely on me in ways that I hadn't anticipated. There was a shift in their behavior, subtle yet profound. They were still the majestic, powerful creatures they had always been, but now there was an added layer to our relationship, a deeper understanding of one another. I continued my visits to the clearing every morning, as I had done before, but now, it wasn't just about feeding them or ensuring their safety. It was about communication, an exchange that didn't need words. Each visit, each encounter, taught me more about the silent language we shared. In those moments, I felt a deep sense of belonging, as if I was no longer just an observer but a part of their world. One afternoon, as I sat on the edge of the clearing, watching the elephants as they grazed peacefully, I noticed something unusual. Rocky, who had been a constant presence at the center of the herd, was moving away from the group. Slowly, deliberately, he wandered toward the trees at the far end of the clearing. He didn't seem troubled, but there was a quiet intensity in his movements. The rest of the herd remained where they were, not seeming to notice his departure. Curious, I stood up and followed him, my footsteps soft on the earth. I didn't want to disturb him, but something in me told me that this was important. As I moved closer, I saw Rocky pause at the base of a large tree. His trunk reached out and gently touched the bark, his massive body still and composed. It was an odd gesture, almost reverent, and I found myself holding my breath, not wanting to intrude on whatever moment this was. I stood there for a long while, watching as Rocky remained in that position. Time seemed to slow, and the forest around us grew quiet, as though nature itself was holding its breath. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rocky turned toward me, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that spoke volumes. There was no fear in his gaze, no confusion, just a silent understanding. And in that moment, I understood that this was more than just a bond between us. It was a connection between all things in the forest, between the land, the creatures, and the lives we led. We were all part of something greater than ourselves. I slowly approached him, careful not to break the fragile peace that had settled between us. As I reached his side, I placed my hand on his flank, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my touch. Rocky didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply stood there, allowing me to be part of his world. There was a quiet hum in the air, an energy that resonated between us. It was as if we were speaking, but without words. In that moment, I felt more connected to the land and to him than I ever had before. This wasn't just about a human and an elephant. It was about life, in all its forms, existing in harmony, understanding that each creature, each being, had its role to play in the delicate balance of nature. I didn't know how long I stood there with him, whether it was minutes or hours, but when I finally stepped back, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known. Rocky gave a soft rumble, almost as if acknowledging our silent communication, and then turned back toward the herd. I followed him, my heart lighter than it had been in days. The rest of the herd was still grazing, unaware of the moment that had just passed between Rocky and me. But I knew that what had transpired was significant. There was a bond between us that couldn't be explained, one that went beyond the physical realm. It was a bond of trust, of shared understanding, and of deep, unspoken respect. And in that moment, I realized that this connection wasn't just about me learning from the elephants, it was also about them teaching me something much more profound: the power of stillness, of presence, of being in the moment. As I sat back down on the ground, watching the herd once more, I knew that this experience had changed me. It had deepened my understanding of what it meant to be truly connected, not just to the animals around me, but to the world at large. The elephants had taught me that sometimes, the most powerful communication is the one that doesn't require words. It's the one that comes from simply being, from sharing the same space, the same breath, the same heartbeat. And in that, there is a beauty that words could never capture.